Good afternoon. I'm Mark Allen with Gaper.io, and I'm here today with Lou Montulli, the CTO of JetInsight and a fellow San Mateo resident. Good afternoon, Lou.
Good afternoon, Mark. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How you doing?
I am really good. This is our repeat performance here. We had a couple of technical difficulties, but it's really great to reconnect with you. Now into my 5th week of remote employment.
Wow. So, and I know you're new to this remote employment thing. You believed in everyone work in the office. So, what's it been like? I mean, what's your takeaway now that you've been doing it for 5 weeks?
Yeah, that's a great question. Me and my business were kind of thrust into this with the recent epidemic, and we weren't at all prepared. I would say we had good foundational preparedness in that we were already a business that had a lot of remote tools, but we had no pre-planning for this. We just one day said nobody can show up to the office anymore, and boom, everyone's remote.
Mhm.
So after that, we had to figure it all out as we went, and it's been a really interesting journey.
I can imagine. What would be your number one takeaway from it, in terms of how it affected you?
Well, this is an old business adage: is you can never over communicate. Communicate. We just keep saying that, and so we just had to really learn completely new ways to make sure that we were doing that as business leaders, and for folks in the company to make sure that they were getting the resources they needed, and in order to make sure that everybody understood what they were working on and how that affected the company. So we had to now rely on some new communication resources. Predominantly, we've moved to video conferencing, just like you and I are doing now, and so those tools have been really, really helpful. And I think as a point in time, we're super fortunate that the internet's more powerful than it used to be. Has been able to support all these needs, and the tools have been fantastic. Right? If we'd done this 5 years ago, I don't know that we would have been in a situation where you could have just turned on video tools and they would have worked.
Yeah, this is true. So now that you have a little exposure to it, what do you think is the future of remote employment? And what do you think could be done differently to make it more effective?
That's a great question. So my perspective before this was I like to show up to the office. I like everybody else to show up to the office. It enables our business to run a little bit more smoothly. And I have to say, after just 5 weeks, my perspective is changing. I'm learning a lot of new skills, and I'm finding that certain things, at least, are seemingly more efficient. I would say, so I'm an engineer. I run an engineering team, and I'm responsible for making sure our product ships. And in the last several weeks, I would say our engineering productivity has actually been better than it was before. Now, part of that is because nobody has anything else to do right now. So people are throwing themselves into work, and I have been as well. I've been using work to keep myself sane because I can't go and visit with friends as much. So we've had a really great experience, and we're shipping a great product right now. Although there are things I miss about going to the office. So I think I'm learning new things. My perspective is changing. I don't know what the future will hold, but I certainly think that I've learned enough that I'm considering more remote work.
Oh, that's interesting. And what is the story behind JetInsights? What do you do as a company? And what's the journey been like?
Yeah, we've had a really interesting journey. We're in the aviation business. We make software for charter operators. So we make the workflow software that makes their businesses work. And obviously, it's a difficult time for the aviation industry. But what we're doing right now is we're really doubling down on new software tools to try to make them even more efficient and give them some extra ways of saving money right now.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the charter business has probably taken a very big hit recently, correct?
Yeah, so it was up initially as
Mhm.
people were still trying to find ways to travel. And now the entire aviation industry is in some distress. I would expect to see charter come back first as people use smaller aircraft to avoid the larger crowds. But at this point, everything's shut down, so we don't really know. But we're hoping that in the next month or two, that some normalcy will return and that people will want to, re-engage in our product.
Yeah, and just out of curiosity, with that, with not a lot of demand right now, is that helping you release more software? Because you have a bigger window right now.
Yeah, I mean, it does represent opportunities for a lot of different businesses. Yeah, I'm involved in a club in the city, and nobody can show up, so it's an opportunity to revisit their point of sale software and other things like that where they don't have incoming transactions. So yeah, I think this is a good opportunity for all sorts of companies to consider what they could do during the period of slower activity that they might not be able to do in high activity. For us, it's making sure we're prioritizing things that really drive efficiency and cost reduction, because that's what's needed by our customers right now. And then as we come out of this this downturn, we'll be looking at other features to just help our customers adapt to the changing circumstances.
Cool. So 5 weeks ago, when this all hit, how did you incorporate the idea of remote at your company, since it was actually thrust upon you?
Yeah. So I was trying to think of all the things that a company needs to do to prepare for this. So I made a small list here. So the first thing we had to do was make sure that everybody had access to everything remotely. And as I mentioned, we were kind of fortunate as a startup. We tended to primarily use tools that were already hosted. So computing resources through Amazon and some Google Docs and a whole bunch of other tools that were just hosted by other people. So we didn't have to really do anything there. All of our resources were already remote. Then we had to establish new lines of communication. So I mentioned we started moving to video. We started using our Slack channel more and using our ticketing system to make sure that we had really clear exposure. And I like to advocate that companies don't use private exchanges like email, because it isolates people from being able to see the whole conversation. In an office, we can hear each other when we're talking about things, and the rumor mill kind of spreads. Well, when we're isolated, at least this is what we've learned. I'm sure you're far more advanced than me at this part. We're trying to make sure that the information is spread as widely as possible. So we're using forms of communication that are accessible by multiple people. Then we wanted to just make sure that our communication was widespread. So we're trying to create new touch points. So adding a few check-in meetings so that everybody could come together. And then in those meetings, we had to establish some new ways of talking to each other, because sometimes these meetings get really long or you're interrupting each other. So we learned some new ways of communicating in the video conferencing and how to sequence everybody and how to make all these meetings as short and efficient as possible. And like I said, we're still learning. We're pretty new to this, but we're forced to do it because we really have a lot of product to ship. So we're just every day we're trying to think of new ways to be more and more efficient.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I've done it for a while now, and when you have video conferencing meetings with, I say when you get past 5 and 6 people, you tend to have people talking over each other because they're right, and that's hard to control.
It is. I've been still communicating with some of my friends. We generally play a weekly poker game, and we tried to move poker online. And one of the things that we noticed is that in the poker game at somebody's house, we could have a couple of conversations going on at the same time. And somebody brought this up and says, how come we can't have 2 conversations going on right now? This seems impossible over the video conferencing. And it is really interesting how video conferencing still can't quite replicate that in person, the subtleties of being able to hear 2 conversations simultaneously in the brain, make sure they can separate them. So we still have some ways to go on the tools, whether that be technology features to separate conversations, or else just higher fidelity so that our brains and ears can differentiate between 2 conversations that are simultaneous and yet distinct.
Well, interestingly enough, I did a podcast Tuesday, I think it was, with a CEO of a company that might have something that helps you with that. So I'll talk to you offline about that.
Yeah, that would be great, because it's definitely something that we would like to do, be able to just kind of sideline a conversation. Obviously, that's not great for a lot of meetings, but in certain meetings, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, no, because that does happen in a real meeting when everyone's there, and you kind of know when to speak up and when not to. And generally, when one person's talking in a virtual meeting, everyone else, there's 2 or 3 people say, "Oh, I want to reply to that," and they talk over each other. So
yeah, that's the new skills we're trying to learn, and there's some chat in there that's helpful. So we're all adapting and learning, and I think if we did this for long enough, we would get really, really hyper efficient at it, which is good. Or we'll get all annoyed. I don't know.
Yeah, well, there's the mute all button does come in handy, and then the raise your hand when those things do come in handy.
Exactly.
The more people you get.
It's back to school. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm ready.
Yeah. Call me, call me.
And then of course the mute button fiascos where people will be talking for 30 seconds and not realize they're muted, and
Hmm.
sort of the things that we're all learning and making fun of right now as the whole world is thrust into these meetings.
And it's funny because I've even seen over 5 weeks where, like, 5 weeks ago, it was very common for someone to be talking without realizing they were on mute, and people have already started to really adjust to that.
Yeah, I love how adaptable humans are.
I know, it's great.
It's one of our best traits.
So, I mean, you were thrust into this. Were there any challenges that you didn't expect, that just, like, anything you could share with us that really surprised you?
Oh, that's a good question. Some things that should not have surprised me, but started happening is misunderstandings,
Mhm.
because the written word is harsh and incomplete.
Yes.
So certainly experienced that where I said something and meant it, very plainly, and it was completely misinterpreted, and it was in like a something in a forum where I wasn't there to immediately reply, and somebody
Mhm.
was a little bent out of shape by that, and I
Mhm.
had to go back and just clarify what I meant. And those sorts of things happen when you don't have that human context, immediate human context to reply off of. Shouldn't be a surprise, but
No, I
it
know.
starts to happen more often now. Those sorts of things. The other surprise is I'm actually enjoying this at times. I love my short commute.
Mhm.
I love how much I'm getting done, and in some ways, it's easier to communicate with people because through the electronic devices, they're essentially always available.
Mhm.
And in person, people be taking a walk or in the bathroom or whatever. You go, if you're looking for somebody, they're not there, and then it's you've gotten up and disrupted your work here. It's really easy now to get a hold of people, easier than ever in some ways.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the thing about email and texting and how it gets taken wrong. I mean, I have a personal thing where if I back and forth text with someone, 3 times, I generally will call them, especially with someone that we don't know each other well, because
Hmm.
so much gets lost in that face to face.
I like that rule.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We have a rule in engineering that if you use the same block of code more than 3 times, then you got to move it to a common function. So
Three,
kind of a
that is,
similar.
I like that. I usually, yeah, twice I can understand, but the third time, no. Make
Right.
it a separate function.
Exactly.
Put it up in shared code. I agree.
The
Wow.
3 times rule. We get that a lot.
Yeah. So now that you've been doing this for 5 weeks, you got a chance to see what it's like to have remote employees. What do you think now about companies like Gaper that, we help companies like you find talent, but not necessarily in your geography? Is that something you would entertain, or do you still like that idea of having someone local?
Yeah. So if you'd asked me 5 weeks ago, I would have said no. It was pretty clear because I wanted everybody in the office, and pure remote just didn't appeal to me. But as I mentioned, my perspective is changing pretty rapidly, and we've learned a lot of new skills, both personally and organizationally. And I think we're going to have to start considering these things, especially since being a Silicon Valley company, we're paying the most premium prices possible to find good talent in the area, and there is great talent here, and that's one of the reasons we're
Mhm.
here. But if we could find really great talent elsewhere, then we'd be tapping into a much larger pool. It would just necessitate changes in the way that we generally run the business, but those might be positive changes as we're already discovering. So
Yeah,
it's
and
opening up a whole new opportunity for us.
yeah, one of the things we notice, and one of the things I get a brushback on that is that you're taking a job away from a U.S. citizen sometimes. And what I tell people is actually is what it's doing is it's allowing a company to grow because it's lowering their costs. They can grow quicker, and they by default hire more local people. They just take very specific skills and outsource them somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah, and you could obviously choose to hire within the United States if that's a priority.
Mhm.
This simply casts your net as wide as you wish it to be, and no larger. It
Mhm.
doesn't necessitate hiring people outside the country if that's not your desire.
Right. No. And I would not ever recommend that to anybody that just doesn't feel comfortable with that, because you shouldn't. If you're not comfortable with it, you should not do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think the first thing is the organization needs to get comfortable with the remote work, and
Mhm.
yeah, we've had some interesting experiences here. We had extended offers to two new engineers prior to our remote work experience, and they started essentially on the first week of our
Mm.
lockdown. So we had a full onboarding experience remotely, and we've had full remote work for the entirety of their careers at the company so far. So it's been a really interesting process. We got to make our tools better because we had to make them easy enough to work over over a video conference, and learning how to make this work. And we've also been interviewing people completely remotely. We haven't hired anybody yet completely remote because we're reducing our hiring at this time, but we anticipate that we will be hiring again pretty shortly, and we may be hiring people entirely remotely.
Cool. And then since you're the CTO of your company, is it safe to assume that these tools that you're using fall under your purview?
They do, although I haven't had to do any maintenance on them so far. They're
Really?
pretty much just publicly accessible tools that work. So we're a G Suite company, so we've just been using
Hmm.
Google Meet and the Google tools, as well as Slack and Jira. So those tools have already been available to us and are great enablers of remote work. But we're also looking for new tools. So if you have any recommendations.
All right, I will. I will definitely let you know. Well, Lou, it's been great talking to you again. It's interesting to see how things have developed over the last 5 weeks.
Indeed, yeah. We first talked 1 week in, and I was deer in the headlights. I really didn't have great answers,
Mhm.
but
And
been learning a lot, and the whole company's been learning a lot. And I think so far it's been a very positive experience.
yeah, now you're an old pro at it, right?
I wouldn't go that far. I'd say we're still learning, but so far it's been pretty good.
Well, good. Well, thanks for taking the time out today and have a great day.
Thank you very much, Mark.
All right.